Welcome to Photoactive, a podcast about photography and technology. I'm Kirk McElhearn.
And I'm Jeff Carlson.
So I saw something about a new camera today, and I found it really interesting. And interesting for a couple of reasons. It's the Panasonic Lumix L10. It's an interesting camera because it looks a lot like the compact fixed lens cameras that we've been talking about. It's kind of like a Fuji X100 series, not like a Ricoh GR, but it's a similar type of camera. It has a zoom lens. I think it's a 24 to 72 millimeter equivalent zoom lens, unlike the Fuji films that are a fixed lens. But what's really interesting is the way the sensor works. And this is an old technology that hasn't been used for a while. I'm going to put a link in the show notes to a page on the Panasonic website that shows this, and I want to explain how it works. So you've got the size of your sensor. Picture a circle around the sensor, drawing the corners of your crop, right? Now, this is a micro four thirds camera by default. So the four corners of the 4/3 are going to be sort of equal distant from the corners of the sensor. But let's say you want to shoot in 3:2. Usually what happens is your camera just crops the top and the bottom of the image, or you do that crop manually afterwards. Here, what it does is it extends the image horizontally to get a bit more of the sensor. In other words, it fills the sensor horizontally, and the vertical just takes up the space that it wants. If you want to shoot 16:9, which vertically is even lower, then it can get a little bit further horizontally to the edges of the sensor. And it may not sound like a lot, but you are getting a little bit more megapixels than when you're cropping the image based on the 4/3. You do this with a little dial on top of the lens where you can set the various aspect ratios. It also does 1:1, but the 1:1 doesn't fill the whole circle. It fills the height of the sensor. You got to go to the link in the show notes to see what this actually means. But what it does is it gives you just a little bit more of the sensor each time when you're shooting at a different aspect ratio than the base 4:3.
I have to admit, I saw the video that Chris and Jordan had made about this, the petapixel video about this camera, and I haven't watched it yet, partially because it's 30 minutes long, and I am starting to get to be cantankerous about long videos. But let me also point out, unrelated to anything, it's got this sort of petal, what would you call it?
Flower petal lens cap?
Flower petal lens cap. So it like the zoom just pokes out of it, which I think is kind of hilarious looking, but also kind of cool.
You know what it kind of reminds me of? Science fiction movies where a docking thing opens in the space station and then the spaceship comes out. It's really weird, but it means you won't lose the lens cap because it's. I don't know if it's integrated into the camera or if that lens cap bit screws on top of the lens.
Oh, that's a good point.
The actual lens that comes out from the petals is fairly small compared to the housing around the lens.
Yeah. Okay. So that aside, I just wanted to make mention of that before I forgot, because when I saw it for the first time, it almost looks like a toy, but of course it's not. Yeah. So it's actually kind of cool. I think I had a camera at one point that had a similar idea that would just open it so you didn't have to deal with having a lens cap.
Worth noting also that it's a Leica lens, and Panasonic has had a long history of working with Leica.
Oh, that is good. Oh, and speaking of lens, it's a fixed lens. You can't change the lens. It just happens to be a
zoom lens.
A zoom lens that's built in. Okay. Yeah.
It's a fixed zoom lens, which you get on travel cameras a lot.
Oh, yeah.
Pocket travel cameras, it's quite common. But here on this sort of compact camera, it's not. And this is the same price as an X100, so it's not a cheap camera.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good. Yeah. My first sort of real quote unquote camera was like a super zoom that did the same thing and would push way out. But in terms of cropping, what I find the most interesting about this is two things. One, I wonder how many people will take advantage of this on a regular basis, and we can get into aspect ratios because I know that there are some people who really take aspect ratios seriously. Some people on this call, in fact.
There is only one true aspect ratio. It's 3:2. It's the aspect ratio of 35 millimeter film. This said, if you're used to shooting medium format film, then the aspect ratio you want is generally like a 5:4, which I think is what the native Hasselblad aspect ratio is.
Okay, well then let's bounce this back to the person who cares, which would be you,
Which is me.
which is you. Does this appeal to you in terms of usage if you really just want to use one aspect ratio, or would this make you consider, well, maybe I need to go out today and I'm going to shoot in a different aspect ratio, knowing that you're going to get more pixels than like a standard crop on any of your other cameras?
I would set it to 3:2 and I would put gaffer tape around it so it can't be changed. It's the one true aspect ratio.
Okay. I mean,
it is. But because if you think about it, 3:2 is, it's not exactly how we see things, but we see things more horizontal than vertical. Mm-hmm. We don't see things in portrait mode, although portrait mode works for portraits of people, right? We're not surprised to see portraits of people in portrait mode. I want to mention we did an episode on aspect ratios sometime last century. It was episode number 13 where we discussed this. And aspect ratio is actually quite important because it gives a lot of information about your image. A wide panoramic aspect ratio, and Hasselblad has that wide aspect ratio. We talked about it when you were trying out that Hasselblad camera. Indicates that it's a Hasselblad camera. 16:9 is something that people didn't shoot with 10 years ago. It's only because of video that it's become common, and you will see it in, more and more people are shooting photos like that. When you look at, say, Ansel Adams, he was shooting an 8x10 camera, so it's that aspect ratio, and it's a big, I want to say it's an almost square, right? 8x10 is almost square. It's equivalent of 5:4. It's a big... It gives the image a bigger look when you're in landscape mode or in portrait mode, because the non-compressed aspect ratio gives you more of a feeling of space. Because the majority of photos we see are in 3:2. The Guardian website, every day they have a selection of press photos from around the world. It's like 10 photos showing events, and it's all sorts of things by all sorts of photographers. Every single one of them is cropped to 3:2. Every news agency must probably submit their photos in 3:2 aspect ratio because they fit in layouts. Newspapers, magazines, websites, although websites are a lot more fluid. But that is the standard aspect ratio, for better or for worse. I think it's essential. Other people may find it obsessive a bit.
Now, hang on. We're talking about photography, so obsessive is not necessarily a bad word, right?
Yes.
Well,
yes.
And I think especially in this case when we're talking about aspect ratios on this camera, it's interesting, I guess, not just that you can switch aspect ratios because, you can do that on any camera that you have. But this feels like if you are somebody who wants to do that switching, who very intentionally goes out and says, I want to do a 1:1 crop because – 1:1 aspect ratio because this is my style or whatever. I think the key value here is that you're actually getting more use of that sensor because everything else is just going to crop. And sometimes it feels like you're wasting – like why did I buy –
you're losing pixels.
Why did I buy a full frame camera if I am not using all of them, right? And so even if it's – I don't know. I mean, I suspect that you take a cropped image and an image from this camera, you put them next to each other, and you don't say which was which, and they're the relatively same focal length, same everything, you probably wouldn't be able to tell unless you pixel peeped. But the person with this camera might feel better about it because they're using more of the capability and the potential of the camera versus the other person who just had to throw away some data in order to get what they wanted.
Exactly. Yeah. You might be getting an extra megapixel when you do 3:2 on this compared to a normal crop of a 4:3, a micro four thirds camera, which I think the sensor's like 25 megapixels, but they talk about it being about 20 effective used. I forget what the term is, because in any crop, you're not going to be using all the sensor the way this is set up. But you're going to get more than you get when you just cut the data off. You get that little extra margin, which can be really useful.
That just makes me think of like shooting RAW versus JPEG. You're going to get the same image, but JPEG's like actually throwing away information. RAW, you have more to work with, kind of. Maybe that's not a direct analogy, but
yeah, not sure it's exactly the same, because here we're just talking about extending the image a little bit, right? The image is actually, so if you're doing a 16:9 compared to a 4:3, the center of your image is larger because the lens itself is extending it wider on the sensor. So it's actually a little bit larger.
Yeah.
Not a lot, depending on how close you are to something. So you would see the difference there. Anyway, what I wanted to talk about here, what this triggered in my mind, is to talk about cropping, because cropping, you were saying before we started that what you were writing a book about Photoshop Elements, and there was a chapter on cropping, and the publisher said, we want you to put that up front because people don't understand cropping.
Apparently there was a lot of feedback that people had written to the publisher saying that they didn't understand cropping, which to me seemed crazy, because you're cropping.
Now, not everyone has your experience, Jeffrey.
I know. Cropping just seems to be a very basic thing to do, but sometimes software will complicate things. I think the feedback was, or at least deep down, the publisher just said, we're getting a lot of feedback about cropping. Can you feature that more prominently? So I did. I moved it up in the table of contents, et cetera. And I think what the heart of the feedback was, people were probably like what we're talking about here, like maybe they were confused about aspect ratios. Which one should I use? How do I switch into it? Like that kind of thing, versus the mechanical, here's how you use a crop tool. And that makes more sense to me.
Because cropping, to me, is probably the most important tool you have in composing your image in post. In other words, you've shot your image, and I mean, let's say that I'm shooting with my Leica Q3. There's 28 millimeters. I'm not close enough. I'm going to need to crop because I want to get a tighter image. Let's say I wasn't sure how to shoot a picture, and I realized that there's something going on in the bottom right that I want to cut out. So I'm going to crop it out by cropping up toward the top left. You have all these options when you crop, which can totally change your composition of a photo. And it's not just a question of, like, if I shoot a photo with my iPhone, right? I don't know if you see, but I post photos of the bread that I make regularly on Blue Sky. And, here's today's loaf, here's the flour that I used. And I've been taking pictures partly to document the different flours and techniques I've been using that I keep in a file in Obsidian. But every time I'm preparing to post one of those photos, I crop it to 3.2 because it would be sacrilegious to post a photo in 4.3. And I do that at the same time that I also do a quick, what's the auto enhance thing? What do they call that in photos?
It's like a little magic wand icon. Yeah.
Yeah. And I do that, and I'm not worried too much about the lighting and stuff, but I do that quickly just to make it stand out a little bit. I'm just doing this for illustrative purposes. And it's when I do this, sometimes I'm cropping because here's what I found. Remember a few weeks ago, I showed you a photo of a loaf of bread, and there was a drop off in the depth of field, and it was really weird. So I realized if I stand back about 5 feet and set the zoom to 2x, I don't get that. So I get the front of the loaf where I've sliced it and the back of the loaf, at an angle, all in focus. So I do that now at 2x. So I have to crop to be able to see the loaf without seeing the mess on my counter or everything else.
Well, I think.
And so cropping is for information purposes, but it's also for composition purposes.
Definitely. And I think a lot of times when cropping, it's very much for composition for me. And sometimes it's not just, there was a tree branch in the lower corner that's distracting me. I can just crop that out. There have been times, and this is going to be the advantage of having a camera with a larger sensor like your Leica. Maybe there's something in the scene that you didn't even see. I mean, maybe you're taking pictures of flowers and you're thinking these are really nice flowers, and then you realize that maybe there's like a bee inside one of them that you didn't notice, but the light's hitting it just right. And so you can crop way in and basically make a new photo because that's the detail that you saw.
Right, because cropping can be zooming if you have enough resolution. And we've often talked about this when we talked about sensors and resolution, that if you have enough pixels, you can take half of your image if you've got a 60 megapixel image, and you got 30 megapixels, which is still a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm just thinking I'm going to put that photo in the show notes, the one that I took of the loaf of bread where you see the fall off, because it was really quite surprising. When you look at it closely, so if you see it on the website, you may need to zoom in, or Jeff, you make a thing where you click and see the full photo. You can see that the front corner of the loaf is in perfect focus, but even the right side, so what it is I took a loaf and I sliced a bit off the end. Even the right side is already out of focus and the back is out of focus. And that's really weird. And that was shot at the 1x normal zoom. Doing that with the 2x zoom leaves much more of the loaf in focus. You still get some background behind that's out of focus. It took a while to figure out what was going on. In fact, I emailed Nick Bott of Gentleman Coders, who we've had on the show many times, to ask him about it. And he explained that even an iPhone is going to have this fall off, which is, it feels wrong for an iPhone to do that. Anyway, that's a topic for another episode.
Yeah, definitely.
But cropping is really interesting because since I started back in high school in the 1970s, I did a photo shop class. So it was a shop class with photography, and we had cameras and we had dark rooms, and we developed black and white film, and we enlarged, and you learned immediately how to crop. And you have like 2 angle brackets that you put over the image to figure out where you're going to crop when you're looking at it from the enlarger. And when you figured out that crop, you'd zoom to fit into the paper, because remember, you've got an 8x10 piece of paper or whatever, and you can't go beyond that. And so you learn about cropping there, but that was like the most basic cropping. That's still retaining that 8x10 image, or shooting the whole 3x2 image on 8x10 paper. We weren't really doing cropping for composition in any way.
Yeah. Okay, so let me ask you this, because I think this is a natural alleyway to go on this discussion. Why are you bothering with all this when AI can do the cropping for you?
And see, that's the next step. Before we started, I just put cropping in the search engine. It comes up with all these websites that can crop your photos for you. And I'm thinking, okay, a lot of people, they don't know how to compose photos, so they drop a photo into one of these things and it focuses on the group of people, centers them, or whatever. Why you would want to do this? But then, of course, there is the professional wedding photographer who shot 5,000 photos and wants to run AI to crop all of them in certain ways, knowing that, of course, he can manually change that, or she can manually change that. And for that reason, it's pretty good. But Apple I assume Lightroom can automatically suggest cropping, right? Apple Photos doesn't do that yet.
Yeah, it can. I'm laughing at myself because I thought I was making a joke, and then you went and made a really good point about automating this, because in my experience, AI cropping has never really been good. In fact, like sometimes it'll key off of some other angle, and so your horizon line will go 45 degrees or something crazy like that. It seems like one of those things where, despite great advances in AI, cropping just hasn't really been successful. But maybe I just haven't seen enough things like the example of the wedding. But
yeah, professional photographers may need to do that. And I'm even thinking sports photographers. Do you think that they have time to manually crop their photos? They send them to a photo editor who's either going to do the crop for them, or who may run a whole bunch of photos through AI to get, a first pass before they decide which photos they're going to run.
Maybe.
We generally think about deliberate photography, right? Taking our time when we're shooting, taking our time when we're editing, etc. But you have to think about the people who are doing hundreds or thousands of photos a day and their needs. Although I don't think many of them listen to this podcast. So, but it is a good point that AI crops. I think Android does this by default. It can just suggest a crop after you've shot a photo.
Yeah. I think there's a feature there. And actually, I thought the iPhone in photos would do it too, but maybe I'm just thinking of something else. Oh yeah, there is an auto button in the crop interface in photos, and I just I just did it, and it did a terrible job of cropping. Had a picture of me and my family, and I tapped auto, and it put us in the lower left corner and focused on some trees in the upper right. So no to the auto cropping.
I never noticed it because in the Photos app on Mac, the button is all the way at the bottom. And so when you're in crop mode, you've got the column, which straighten, vertical, horizontal, then the aspect ratios. I never look down the bottom. It's like half of the column is black, and there is an auto button down there. So here we go. There's auto cropping. So I just did a photo. This isn't really a good example. I went to the dentist last week, and they're across from a cemetery next to a church. And while I was waiting, I went outside with my iPhone. I took some pictures. The light was really interesting, but it can't find anything to crop in that because there's gravestones and trees and shade and light, and there's no subject, as it were. I'm just trying one with a picture of Rosalind the cat on the patio, and I click auto. It doesn't change anything. If I go into freeform, hold on, let's try freeform. I click auto. It doesn't change anything. So is this useless?
No, what that's telling you is that Photos thinks that picture of Rosalind is perfect and doesn't need to be changed at all. That's what it is. It's a value judgment.
You probably need to have a photo of something with a big, lots of people in subjects it can recognize in a background that aren't composed properly, like aren't centered.
I almost wonder if maybe this is really designed for pictures of people where you have too much space on the right-hand side, so it's going to crop in so the people are more prominent, because I've never seen a good example of this done on, say, a landscape photo where you're deliberately putting together, elements in the frame to balance across each other. But also, I will say, and this applies to, even when you're editing tones and colors, oftentimes you click the auto button to see what the software suggests. And that could be a good starting point. And maybe that's the same thing with AI cropping. You click it to see, and maybe you realize that there was something that's more prominent, or it comes close to what you might think. Because, we've run into people who they don't visualize the end result, and they need to see it. They need to test that out and have something before them and then make that judgment, rather than trying to imagine how this needs to be cropped. So maybe this is a good exercise where you click auto, see what it does, and then you realize, oh, maybe I don't need this lamppost off to the side, which I thought was balancing out the frame, turns out to not be doing that, and then you can adjust from there.
I've just thought of another possibility. Let's say you're doing street photography and you're shooting from the hip. So you're not really composing. This could be the kind of thing that could help you. And in fact, that's something where you're always going to have to crop, if only to straighten images. Although you may not want to straighten them. Sometimes when they're on an angle, they look better. But you may want to focus on a specific person, a specific interaction in a photo that's off to the left, and zoom in with your crop, which is something that you wouldn't have time to do when you're actually taking the picture.
Right, yeah, because that's more about just being in the moment and grabbing something. I will also say, and I think we only need to touch on this briefly, is that the other reason that you would want to be cropping is if you are getting something ready to print, because you need to print on a 5x7 or a 4x3 sheet of paper. Then you're going to be cropping to make sure that it's balanced in that aspect ratio for printing specifically.
Or you're going to print in your chosen aspect ratio and just have borders that are wider.
Yeah.
If I'm cropping to 3:2, I'm not going to print in 4:3, right?
But if you are printing on like a 5x7, then you can figure out how you want that.
Now we're getting into math. This is a problem.
Photo math is the worst math.
All right, that was more than I expected to talk about cropping. We're already at the 30-minute point, although there's a couple of minutes that have to be edited out. So until next time, Jeff.
Until next time.
Thanks for listening to Photoactive. You can find show notes, including any photos we discuss in this episode, at photoactive.co. That's photoactive.co. We couldn't afford the M. You can join our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/photoactivecast. That's photoactivecast in one word. You can subscribe to Photoactive in your favorite podcast app or on Apple Podcasts. See the links on our website. And think about leaving us a rating or review in iTunes or in your podcast.